At 2:17 a.m. on their wedding night, Dr. Kendrick Thompson found a birth certificate that would turn him into a killer. New Orleans, Louisiana. The woman he had just married was born in the city that murdered his twin sister 19 years ago. By dawn, one of them would be dead, and the reason why will shatter everything you think you know about love, trauma, and the ghosts that geography can resurrect from the grave. How does a place on a map become a death sentence? How does discovering where someone was born justify taking their life? These questions would haunt investigators for months as they tried to understand how two people who seemed perfect for each other could end in such devastating destruction. Welcome to Guilty Whispers. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to become part of our growing family of true crime enthusiasts. Share your location in the comments below. We love seeing how our stories connect people across the world. Aaliyah Brooks had built her entire adult life around a single deception that seemed harmless until it became deadly. Born in New Orleans but raised in Atlanta from the age of 3, she had spent years crafting the perfect fiction about her childhood. Every job application carried the lie. Every relationship was built on the edited version of her past. Every casual conversation about hometowns and family history was carefully choreographed to hide 3 crucial years of her life that she barely remembered but that would ultimately kill her. She had no idea that the man she was falling in love with carried a wound so specific, so targeted, that her birthplace alone would make her an enemy in his traumatized mind. She could not have known that Dr. Kendrick Thompson had spent 19 years turning New Orleans into a symbol of everything evil in the world, that he had made his sister's death into a mythology that painted anyone connected to Louisiana as a betrayer of sacred memory. Philadelphia, 2005. The family was walking back from dinner in the French Quarter when the teenager stepped out of an alley. Tavon Mitchell was 19 years old, desperate, and armed with a gun that shook in his hands as he demanded their wallets with a voice that cracked with fear and adrenaline. Later, police would discover that Mitchell was trying to get money for his girlfriend's medical bills, that he had never committed a violent crime before, that he had been high on methamphetamines that made him paranoid and unpredictable. Kiana had moved to hand over her small purse, the one that contained her camera and $23 in birthday money, when something spooked Mitchell. Maybe it was the sound of approaching footsteps from other tourists, maybe it was a car backfiring, maybe it was his own drug-induced paranoia, but the gun went off twice in rapid succession before he ran into the maze of French Quarter alleys where he would be caught 3 hours later. Kendrick found himself on his knees on the cobblestones of Royal Street, holding his sister as her life poured out onto stones that had witnessed 3 centuries of human drama. His hands, already steady from years of academic excellence and a growing interest in medicine, pressed against wounds that were too severe for 14-year-old skills to manage. He could feel her pulse weakening under his fingertips, could see the light fading from eyes that had always been mirrors of his own. Kiana's last words, whispered with blood on her lips and a voice that was already starting to fade, would echo in Kendrick's mind for the next 19 years, "Don't let this place win, Kendrick. Don't let this place win. Promise me you won't let Louisiana take anything else from us." She was gone before the ambulance arrived, her hand still clutched in his, her eyes still looking at him with the trust that had defined their entire relationship, the faith that her worry twin would somehow find a way to fix this unfixable thing. The paramedics found Kendrick in a state of catatonic shock, covered in his sister's blood, still whispering promises to her corpse about not letting Louisiana win. The trauma began its work immediately, carving neural pathways that would define how Kendrick saw the world for the rest of his life. In his 14-year-old mind, the equation was simple and absolute: New Orleans equals death. Louisiana killed his sister. And anyone or anything connected to that cursed place was a betrayal of Kiana's memory and a violation of the sacred promise he had made to her dying breath. The funeral took place in Philadelphia 5 days later, but Kendrick's mind remained trapped on that New Orleans street corner. His parents, drowning in their own grief and struggling to understand how a family vacation had turned into a nightmare, made the decision to send him to Vancouver to live with his Aunt Margot, hoping that distance and time would help him heal. They could not bear to watch him sitting in Kiana's room for hours at a time, talking to her ghost, promising her over and over that Louisiana would not win, that he would never let that place destroy anything else he loved. But trauma had already begun its insidious work, rewriting Kendrick's brain chemistry and creating associations that logic could not penetrate. Every time he heard a Louisiana accent on television, his heart rate spiked. Every time someone mentioned New Orleans cuisine or jazz music or Mardi Gras, he felt physically ill. Every time he saw Spanish moss or wrought iron balconies in movies, he was transported back to Royal Street, to his sister's blood on his hands, to promises that felt more sacred than religious vows. High school in Vancouver passed in a blur of academic excellence and emotional isolation that his Aunt Margot tried desperately to penetrate. Kendrick threw himself into his studies with the desperate intensity of someone trying to outrun his own thoughts, earning perfect grades that felt like tributes to Kiana's interrupted future. He refused to watch movies set in Louisiana, changed the channel when travel shows featured New Orleans, walked out of restaurants that served Creole food, and developed panic attacks whenever he encountered anything that reminded him of the place that had murdered his other half. His aunt tried therapy, but Kendrick had already learned to perform normalcy for adults who wanted to help him heal. He could recite the right words about grief and acceptance, could demonstrate progress that satisfied counselors who did not understand the depth of his psychological rewiring. Meanwhile, the real Kendrick was building an internal fortress around his trauma, creating elaborate mental defenses that turned his sister's death into a mythology where Louisiana represented pure evil and anyone connected to it was automatically suspect. The academic excellence continued through his senior year, when Kendrick graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. His acceptance speech never mentioned his sister directly, but every word was a promise to her ghost. He would become a doctor, he would save lives, he would prove that Louisiana had not won by taking everything good from the world. His classmates saw a brilliant, quiet student who was destined for greatness. They had no idea that every achievement was a weapon in a war against a geography that had taken his reason for living. But he did not know what was coming when love finally found him in the form of a woman whose birth certificate would unlock 19 years of carefully controlled rage. If you're still following this story, drop "I'm still here" in the comments. Let's see who's really watching this far. Aaliyah Brooks arrived at Philadelphia General Hospital on a Tuesday morning in March, carrying coffee that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon and the kind of competence that made everyone around her breathe a little easier. She had been hired as the new nursing supervisor for the emergency department, transferring from what she told everyone was a prestigious position at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. Her resume was impeccable, her references glowing, her interview performance so impressive that the hiring committee had made their decision within hours of meeting her. Kendrick noticed her immediately, not just for her beauty, though she was stunning in the way that made people turn and look twice, but for the way she moved through chaos like a dancer who knew every step by heart. During her first week, she had reorganized the supply closets, implemented a new triage system that reduced wait times by 30%, and somehow convinced the most difficult doctors to actually follow protocol without making them feel managed or manipulated. Their first real conversation happened during a multi-car accident on Interstate 95 that brought 7 patients into trauma bays simultaneously. The afternoon had been relatively quiet until the ambulances started arriving in rapid succession, a family of 4 in a minivan, 2 teenagers in a sports car, and a truck driver whose rig had jackknifed trying to avoid the initial collision. The emergency department transformed from controlled calm to barely contained chaos in the space of minutes. While other staff members struggled with the overwhelming influx of critical cases, Aaliyah coordinated care with the precision of a conductor leading a complex orchestra. She anticipated Kendrick's needs before he voiced them, had supplies ready before he reached for them, and maintained eye contact that communicated trust and capability in equal measure. When he needed blood type B negative for the truck driver, she was already on the phone with the blood bank. When the teenage driver coded and needed immediate intubation, she had the equipment prepared and the family members safely relocated to a private consultation room. "You read minds," Kendrick told her during a brief moment between patients, blood still on his scrubs from emergency surgery on the minivan's driver. "I read body language," Aaliyah replied, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. You tense your shoulders differently when you need plasma versus whole blood. Your left eyebrow twitches when you're about to ask for intubation equipment. After 12 years in emergency medicine, you learn to anticipate what doctors need before they know they need it. When the last patient was stabilized and transferred to intensive care, and the department returned to its normal controlled chaos, Kendrick found himself looking for excuses to work the same shifts Aaliyah did. He volunteered for overtime whenever her name appeared on the schedule, switched shifts with colleagues who complained about working weekends, and discovered urgent administrative tasks that required consultation with the nursing supervisor. Their courtship unfolded in the liminal spaces between emergencies, in brief conversations stolen during shift changes, in shared glances across trauma bays when they worked together to save someone's life. Aaliyah understood the weight Kendrick carried in ways that previous girlfriends had not. She recognized the signs of a surgeon who took every loss personally, who carried the faces of patients he could not save, who measured his worth by his ability to repair what violence and accident had broken. "I've never been able to date anyone who doesn't work in medicine," Aaliyah confided during one of their late-night conversations, sitting in the hospital cafeteria at 2 a.m. after a particularly difficult shift. "How do you explain to someone that you've spent the evening trying to reattach a construction worker's severed hand? How do you make them understand that watching someone die changes the way you see everything else?" Kendrick nodded, feeling understood in a way that was both comforting and dangerous. "My last girlfriend broke up with me because I missed her birthday party to perform emergency surgery on a 6-year-old who had been hit by a drunk driver. She said I cared more about strangers than I did about her." "Did you?" Aaliyah asked, not accusingly but with genuine curiosity. "In that moment, yes," Kendrick admitted. "That little girl needed me more than my girlfriend needed me at a party. Some people don't understand that medicine isn't just a job, it's a calling that doesn't respect normal boundaries." What Kendrick did not know was that every word of understanding from Aaliyah came from her own carefully hidden pain. Her empathy for his dedication to saving lives was genuine, but it was also informed by secrets she had been carrying since childhood. She understood loss and trauma and the way that violence could reshape a person's entire worldview, but she could never tell him why she understood so deeply without revealing the truth about her own past. As their relationship deepened over months of shared shifts and stolen moments, Kendrick began to open up in ways he had not since Kiana's death. He told Aaliyah about the pressure he felt to be perfect, about the nightmares that still woke him up some nights, about the way that losing patients felt like personal failure even when he knew intellectually that medicine had limitations. When he finally told her about losing his sister to violence, careful never to mention the location or specific circumstances, Aaliyah had responded with the kind of empathy that felt like coming home. "I can't imagine losing someone that close to you," she said, taking his hand across the small table in the hospital cafeteria where they often ate together. "It must have shaped everything about who you became." "It did," Kendrick said, surprising himself with his honesty. "For a long time, I thought about giving up on everything. But then I realized that becoming a doctor was a way to honor her memory, to make sure her death had meaning by saving other people." Aaliyah squeezed his hand, and Kendrick felt something in his chest that had been locked tight since he was 14 years old begin to loosen. This woman understood him in ways that no one else had. She saw the pain he carried and did not try to fix it or minimize it or suggest that he should have moved on by now. She simply accepted it as part of who he was and loved him anyway. What he could not see was the way Aaliyah's face changed when she thought he was not looking, the guilt that crossed her features when he talked about his sister's death, the way her hands trembled slightly when he mentioned violence and trauma and loss. She was carrying her own secrets, her own fears, her own carefully constructed deceptions that were becoming harder to maintain as their relationship grew more serious. The problem was that Aaliyah was falling in love, really, deeply, completely in love for the first time in her adult life. Every day with Kendrick felt like discovering a new part of herself, like becoming the person she had always wanted to be but had never been brave enough to attempt. He challenged her intellectually, supported her professionally, and made her feel like the most important person in any room they entered together. The thought of losing him had become unbearable, which made the secret of her birthplace feel like a time bomb that could destroy everything they were building. As months passed, their relationship took on the comfortable rhythms of a couple who had found their perfect match. They worked the same shifts whenever possible, shared meals in the hospital cafeteria, spent their days off exploring Philadelphia's museums and restaurants and neighborhoods. Kendrick introduced Aaliyah to his favorite bookstores and coffee shops, while she showed him parts of the city he had never noticed despite living there for years. Their colleagues began to comment on the change in both of them. Kendrick seemed lighter, more social, more willing to participate in hospital events and gatherings. Aaliyah seemed more grounded, more confident, more willing to take professional risks that led to innovations in patient care. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had worked with Kendrick for 5 years, told anyone who would listen that she had never seen him so happy. But happiness made the deception harder for Aaliyah to maintain. Every moment of joy felt stolen, every expression of love from Kendrick felt like a reproach for her dishonesty. She began to understand that her lies were not just about geography, they were about trust, about the foundation of their relationship, about whether love could survive the revelation that she had been hiding something so fundamental about her identity. The first crack in her carefully constructed facade came during a conversation about families and childhood memories. Kendrick had been sharing stories about growing up with Kiana, and Aaliyah found herself inventing elaborate fictions about her supposed Atlanta childhood to match his level of detail and intimacy. The lies came so easily that they frightened her, but they also felt necessary to maintain the balance of their relationship. "I wish I could have met her," Aaliyah said after Kendrick finished telling a particularly touching story about his sister's determination to become a marine biologist. "She would have loved you," Kendrick replied, and Aaliyah felt her heart break a little at the trust in his voice. "She always said she could tell everything about a person by how they treated other people when they thought no one was watching. The way you care for patients, the way you treat the cleaning staff and the cafeteria workers with the same respect you show to doctors, she would have recognized your character immediately." The conversation should have been a moment of pure happiness, but instead it filled Aaliyah with dread. How could she continue to accept Kendrick's trust when she was lying about something so basic? How could she let him share his most precious memories when she was carefully editing her own past to avoid triggering his trauma? The weight of her deception was becoming unbearable, but the thought of confessing felt even worse. As their first anniversary approached, Kendrick began dropping hints about making their relationship official. He talked about introducing Aaliyah to extended family members, about planning trips to visit his aunt in Vancouver, about the possibility of moving in together and sharing a lease. Each conversation felt like another step toward a future that Aaliyah desperately wanted but feared she could never truly have. On their wedding day, both thought their secrets were safe, but the truth was already growing too large to contain. The ceremony took place at the Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta, a choice that Kendrick had insisted upon to honor what he believed was Aaliyah's hometown. Every detail was perfect, from the ivory roses to the string quartet that played jazz standards carefully selected to avoid any New Orleans associations. Aaliyah walked down the aisle in her grandmother's dress, carrying both their hopes for the future and the weight of her deception. Kendrick saw only perfection as his bride approached him. This was his redemption, proof that life could offer second chances even after devastating loss. Aaliyah represented everything clean and untainted by his past, a love that existed entirely separate from the trauma that had defined him. As they exchanged vows, he felt something in his chest unlock for the first time since Kiana's death. The reception was a celebration of new beginnings. Aaliyah's adoptive family from Atlanta filled one side of the room while Kendrick's relatives and colleagues occupied the other. Toasts were made to love conquering all, to two people who had found each other against all odds. Aaliyah smiled and danced with her new husband, all while managing growing anxiety about the paperwork that would be required for legal name changes. The marriage license process in Georgia had required birth certificates, but Aaliyah had managed the paperwork separately, claiming she wanted to handle the bureaucratic details as a surprise for Kendrick. Their honeymoon suite at the Four Seasons was a monument to luxury and romance. Champagne chilled in silver buckets, rose petals scattered across Egyptian cotton sheets, and a view of the Atlanta skyline that stretched endlessly into the night. Kendrick carried Aaliyah across the threshold with joy he had not felt since childhood, finally believing that his future could be bigger than his past. They made love with desperate passion of two people who had found salvation in each other's arms. Afterward, as Aaliyah slept curled against his chest, Kendrick stared at the ceiling and marveled at the peace he felt. The nightmares that had plagued him for 19 years seemed to have disappeared. For the first time since Kiana's death, he was not running from his memories, he was building something new on top of them. What happened in the next hour would destroy two families forever. At 2:17 a.m., unable to sleep from excitement about their future together, Kendrick decided to surprise his new wife by organizing the paperwork they would need for administrative tasks. Aaliyah's purse sat on the dresser, and he knew she had been stressed about the bureaucratic requirements of changing her name. He would sort through everything, make lists, maybe even start filling out forms so she could wake up to one less thing to worry about. The birth certificate was in the inside pocket of her purse, folded neatly between her passport and their marriage license. Kendrick unfolded it with the casual attention of someone organizing documents, not expecting anything more dramatic than confirming spelling for legal forms. His eyes moved across the official state seal, the neat typescript of 1990s bureaucracy, the standard details of birth weight and time of delivery. Then he saw it, New Orleans, Louisiana. The paper trembled in his hands as his brain struggled to process what he was reading. This had to be wrong. Some administrative error, perhaps, or maybe a document that belonged to someone else. But the name was unmistakable, Aaliyah Marie Brooks, born October 15, 1996, in New Orleans, Louisiana, to parents listed as residents of the same city that had murdered his sister. The bedroom began to spin as 19 years of carefully controlled trauma erupted like a psychological volcano. Every memory he had suppressed, every nightmare he had managed, every promise he had made to Kiana's ghost came flooding back with the force of a tsunami. The woman sleeping beside him, the woman he had just married, the woman he had trusted with his heart and his future, was from the place that had destroyed his life. She had lied to him. For their entire relationship, through every conversation about his sister, through every moment when he had shared his pain about losing Kiana to Louisiana violence, she had known. She had to have known what New Orleans meant to him, and she had chosen to hide her connection to that cursed place. Their entire marriage was built on deception, and the deception was connected to the one thing in the world he could never forgive. The confrontation began at 2:47 a.m. when Kendrick shook Aaliyah awake with the birth certificate clutched in his hand like evidence of her betrayal. She opened her eyes to find her husband transformed into someone she did not recognize, his face contorted with rage and pain that seemed to come from somewhere deep and primordial. "New Orleans," he said, his voice barely above a whisper but somehow more terrifying than shouting. "You're from New Orleans, Louisiana." Aaliyah's stomach dropped as she saw the paper in his hands, understanding immediately that her worst fear had materialized. "Kendrick, I can explain. I was going to tell you." "When?" The word came out like a gunshot. "When were you going to tell me that you're from the place that killed my sister? Before or after you finished destroying everything we built together?" "I was 3 when we moved to Atlanta." The words tumbled out in desperate explanation. "I don't even remember New Orleans. I'm not really from there, not in any way that matters. My whole life has been in Atlanta." But Kendrick was no longer listening to rational explanation. The trauma that had lived in his bones for 19 years had awakened, and it recognized Aaliyah as the enemy. She was Louisiana personified, the living embodiment of everything that had taken Kiana from him. The fact that she had hidden this truth made it even worse. It proved that she knew how much it would hurt him. "You lied to me about the one thing that mattered most," he said, standing over her with the birth certificate shaking in his hand. "Every day for 2 years, you looked me in the eye and lied about who you are. Every time I told you about my sister, every time I shared my pain, you knew you were connected to the place that killed her." The argument escalated with the terrifying speed of long-suppressed trauma finally finding its target. Aaliyah tried to explain that she had been afraid, that she had fallen in love before she knew how deep his wounds ran, that she had been planning to tell him after their honeymoon when they were settled and secure. But to Kendrick, every word sounded like manipulation, every explanation felt like another layer of betrayal. The attack happened with the surgical precision that had made Kendrick famous in the trauma bay. His medical training had taught him exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly where the human body was most vulnerable, exactly how to inflict maximum damage with minimum effort. The same hands that had saved hundreds of lives turned their knowledge toward destruction, and Aaliyah Brooks died in their honeymoon suite with the same efficiency that had characterized her husband's most successful surgeries. At 3:23 a.m., hotel security finally responded to noise complaints from neighboring rooms about a disturbance. They found Kendrick sitting on the bed beside his wife's body, still holding her birth certificate, repeating the same words over and over: "She lied. She lied about where she was from. She lied about everything." But the truth was even darker than anyone imagined. Detective Angela Reed had spent 20 years working domestic violence cases, but the scene in the Four Seasons honeymoon suite was unlike anything in her extensive experience. The victim was a respected nurse with no history of violence or troubled relationships, beloved by colleagues and patients alike. The perpetrator was a renowned trauma surgeon whose colleagues described him as gentle, dedicated, and incapable of harming anyone. The motive appeared to be a birth certificate, a piece of paper that most people would consider irrelevant to a marriage built on 2 years of love and compatibility. The initial scene revealed contradictions that made the case even more puzzling. Hotel security footage showed a happy couple checking in just hours before the murder, laughing and kissing in the elevator, showing no signs of marital discord or brewing violence. Wedding guests who had spoken to detectives described a perfect ceremony with no red flags, no arguments, no indication that either partner harbored deadly secrets. Kendrick's confession was immediate and complete, but his claimed justification, that his wife had been born in New Orleans, made no sense to anyone who heard it. The preliminary investigation focused on Kendrick's background, where detectives discovered the 2005 police report from New Orleans that changed everything about their understanding of the case. Detective Brooks spent hours on the phone with her counterpart in Louisiana, Detective Marcus Thibodeau, who remembered the Thompson case clearly despite the passage of 19 years. The sister was a beautiful kid, Thibodeau told Brooks during their first conversation. 14 years old, full of life, visiting from Philadelphia with her family. The brother was traumatized beyond anything I'd seen in 25 years of police work. He sat in that hospital waiting room covered in her blood, refusing to let anyone clean him up, promising her over and over that Louisiana wouldn't win. We had to sedate him before he'd let the paramedics examine him for injuries. The shooter, Tavon Mitchell, was still serving his 25-year sentence at Louisiana State Penitentiary, where Detective Brooks interviewed him via video conference. Mitchell, now 38 years old and deeply remorseful about his crimes, painted a picture of a senseless tragedy that had destroyed multiple families. "I was high on meth, desperate for money for my girlfriend's medical bills, and scared out of my mind," Mitchell told Brooks from his prison cell. "I never meant to hurt those kids. The gun just went off when I heard footsteps behind me. That girl's brother, Kendrick, he looked at me like I was the devil himself. I've spent 19 years in here thinking about that look, knowing I put it there." Back in Philadelphia, interviews with Kendrick's colleagues revealed a pattern of behavior that had seemed quirky but harmless until viewed through the lens of murder. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had worked with Kendrick for 5 years, described his absolute refusal to discuss anything related to Louisiana. He would literally leave the room if someone mentioned New Orleans, she told Detective Brooks. "During Hurricane Katrina, when we were all talking about the disaster and organizing relief efforts, Kendrick disappeared for 3 days. We found out later he had called in sick and spent the time locked in his apartment. We all thought it was just a regional prejudice or maybe a bad vacation experience. Nobody imagined it was connected to trauma this severe." Amanda Kim, Kendrick's primary care physician, revealed that he had been prescribed antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications multiple times throughout his career but had never disclosed his sister's violent death to any mental health professional. His medical records showed a pattern of deflection and avoidance whenever conversations turned to family history or traumatic experiences. "He was a doctor," Dr. Kim explained to investigators. "We trusted his self-assessment of his mental health. He passed all his psychological evaluations for medical school and residency. If we had known about the severity of his untreated PTSD, mandatory counseling would have been required, and he never would have been cleared for trauma surgery." The digital investigation uncovered another crucial piece of evidence that illustrated the comprehensive nature of Aaliyah's deception. Her phone records showed dozens of calls to New Orleans numbers throughout their relationship, including lengthy conversations with family members she had claimed not to exist. Text messages revealed her ongoing connection to her birth city, including plans to visit for holidays and family celebrations that she had described to Kendrick as trips to see Atlanta relatives. Her LinkedIn profile listed Atlanta as her hometown, while her nursing license applications consistently showed the same information, technically accurate since her legal residency had been changed to Georgia at age 3 when she moved, making her Atlanta claims valid for licensing purposes while hiding the emotional truth of her birth. Dr. Sean Simon, a specialist in PTSD and trauma psychology, was brought in to evaluate Kendrick's mental state and explain how childhood trauma could metastasize over decades if left untreated. Dr. Torres spent hours interviewing Kendrick in jail, reviewing his medical history, and analyzing the crime scene evidence. Mr. Thompson developed what I term geographic trauma, DR. Torres explained to Detective Brooks. For him, New Orleans was not just a city where something bad happened, it had become a symbol of everything evil in the world. Discovering that his wife was connected to it triggered a complete dissociative break where rational thought became impossible. The investigation into Aaliyah's background painted a picture of a woman terrified of losing the man she loved. Her adoptive sister in Atlanta, Jessica Brooks, described tearful phone conversations where Aaliyah agonized over whether to tell Kendrick the truth about her birthplace. She knew he had trauma related to Louisiana, but she didn't know how deep it went until they were already in love, Jessica explained during her interview with Detective Brooks. By then, she felt trapped between telling the truth and losing him or keeping the secret and hoping it never mattered. She used to call me crying, asking what I would do if I were in her situation. Jessica revealed that Aaliyah had been planning to confess her true birthplace after their honeymoon, and had already scheduled a couples therapy appointment to help them work through the revelation together. She wasn't trying to deceive him forever, Jessica insisted. She was trying to find the safest way to tell him the truth without destroying their relationship. She loved him too much to risk losing him over something she saw as irrelevant to who she really was. The breakthrough in understanding came when detectives discovered Aaliyah's private journal, hidden in her apartment behind medical textbooks and filled with entries that documented her growing fear about her secret. The journal revealed the tragic irony at the heart of the case: Aaliyah had never intended to maintain the deception permanently. She had been planning to confess within weeks of her death, had already scheduled the therapy appointment that might have saved both their lives. The final entry, written just 3 days before her wedding, was particularly devastating. "I've made my decision. I'm going to tell Kendrick about New Orleans after our honeymoon. I've made an appointment with Dr. Ross for couples therapy so we can work through it together. I know he'll be hurt that I waited so long, but I also know that our love is strong enough to survive this. I just need to find the right way to explain that I was scared, not malicious. Maybe if we're in a safe space with professional help, he'll understand that hiding this was about protecting our relationship, not betraying it." Dr. Richard Santos, the chief of emergency medicine, told investigators about several incidents where Kendrick had transferred cases or called in sick rather than treat patients from Louisiana. "We thought it was just a regional bias," Dr. Santos explained. "Some doctors have preferences about patient populations based on cultural comfort or language barriers. We never imagined it was connected to trauma this severe or that it could predict violence." The pattern revealed that Kendrick's trauma had been affecting his professional judgment for years, creating a trail of evidence that prosecutors would argue showed his Louisiana obsession was not a sudden break but a long-term psychological condition that had been building toward violence. Would you have spotted the warning signs in this relationship? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The most chilling discovery came from security footage at the hospital where both Kendrick and Aaliyah worked. Investigators found multiple instances where Aaliyah had changed the subject or left the room when conversations turned to Louisiana topics, behaviors that demonstrated her awareness of Kendrick's triggers and her efforts to protect him from psychological distress. The footage showed a woman desperately trying to manage her partner's trauma while hiding her own connection to his greatest fear. The investigation concluded with a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation that would become crucial evidence in the trial. Multiple experts agreed that Kendrick had suffered a complete psychological break upon discovering Aaliyah's birthplace, but they disagreed about whether this diminished his culpability for her murder. The stage was set for a trial that would force a jury to decide whether untreated trauma could excuse the ultimate betrayal of love. Then investigators discovered something that changed everything about the case. A recording on Aaliyah's phone that she had made just days before her wedding, practicing what she planned to tell Kendrick about her birthplace. Her voice, full of love and fear in equal measure, would haunt everyone who heard it. The trial of Dr. Kendrick Thompson became a battleground between competing narratives of justice and compassion. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Patricia Rivers, argued that the defendant's medical training made his violence especially heinous. This was not a crime of passion, Rivers told the jury. This was the calculated murder of a woman by someone who knew exactly how to kill efficiently and quietly. The defendant's trauma does not excuse his choice to become a killer. The defense, headed by renowned criminal attorney David Chen, painted a picture of a man destroyed by untreated psychological wounds that had festered for 19 years. Kendrick Thompson is not a monster, Chen argued. He is a victim of our society's failure to recognize and treat trauma properly. His sister's murder created a psychological landmine that exploded the moment he discovered his wife's birthplace. This was not murder, this was a man's mind breaking under pressure it was never equipped to handle. I held her hand while she died, Kendrick testified through tears that had been building for 19 years. I promised her that Louisiana wouldn't win, that I wouldn't let that place destroy anything else I loved. When I found out Aaliyah was from there, it felt like she had brought the enemy into our bed. It felt like she had betrayed not just me, but Kiana's memory too. I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking at all. The testimony from both families created some of the most emotionally devastating moments in Philadelphia criminal court history. Aaliyah's adoptive mother, Olivia Brooks, addressed Kendrick directly. "I don't hate you," she said. "I hate what happened to your sister, and I hate what trauma did to your mind. My daughter loved you enough to risk everything, and she died trying to protect that love. I pray you can live with that knowledge." The jury deliberated for 18 hours, struggling to balance justice for Aaliyah against compassion for Kendrick's psychological condition. The final verdict, guilty of voluntary manslaughter rather than first-degree murder, reflected their belief that trauma had diminished his capacity for rational thought while still holding him responsible for his actions. Judge Pamela Butler sentenced Kendrick to 15 years in prison with mandatory psychological treatment throughout his incarceration. But the story did not end with the verdict. The unexpected outcome of the case came from Kendrick's transformation in prison, where intensive therapy finally began to heal wounds that had been festering for 2 decades. Working with Dr. Barbara Ross, the same therapist Aaliyah had planned to see, Kendrick began to understand how his unprocessed grief had turned his sister's memory into a weapon. The geographic trigger that had made Louisiana synonymous with evil slowly began to loosen its hold as he learned to separate his sister's death from the place where it happened. The most profound moment in his healing came during a session where Dr. Ross helped him understand Aaliyah's perspective. "She didn't betray your sister's memory," the therapist explained. "She was trying to protect the love you had built together. She died because she loved you too much to risk losing you, just like your sister died because she was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Neither death was about betrayal, both were about the random cruelty of a world where good people sometimes suffer for reasons that make no sense. 18 months into his sentence, Kendrick wrote a letter to Aaliyah's family that would eventually become the foundation for an unlikely alliance. "I know I can never bring her back," he wrote. "I know I can never undo the damage my broken mind caused to all of us. But I can make sure her death has meaning by helping other people avoid the trap I fell into. Aaliyah died because I was too proud and too scared to get help for my trauma. Maybe we can save other families from the same tragedy." The question that haunted everyone who studied the case remained unanswered: could love have survived if fear had not killed it first? The tragedy of Kendrick Thompson and Aaliyah Brooks asks us to examine the secrets we keep from the people we love most. If you discovered your spouse had lied about something that triggered your deepest trauma, how would you react? Should Aaliyah have told Kendrick the truth before marriage, knowing it might end their relationship? Was her deception an act of love or an act of betrayal? These are questions without easy answers, but they are questions we must ask if we want to understand how two people who loved each other completely could end up destroying each other so thoroughly. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of trauma and healing. How many people are walking among us carrying wounds so deep that they have become weapons? How many relationships are built on foundations of carefully managed deception, where love and fear dance together in an elaborate performance of normalcy? What happens when the things we are most afraid to tell become the things that could save us? If you thought this story was devastating, wait until you hear what happened when a woman discovered her husband's business trips were actually visits to the 3 other families he had been supporting in different states. A bigamist's web of lies unraveled in the most shocking way possible, and the investigation revealed that some people are capable of living multiple lives with terrifying skill. This tragedy asks us all: are some wounds too deep to heal? And when does protecting someone you love become the very thing that destroys them? Share your thoughts below, we read every comment. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to understand how trauma can turn love into a weapon. Hit subscribe because tomorrow we're diving into another case that'll make you question everything you think you know about marriage and trust. This is Guilty Whispers, where the truth behind closed doors finally finds its voice. Because sometimes, the thing you're most afraid to tell the person you love is the thing that could save both your lives. See you tomorrow.